we not address it? Madam President, I know there are others who wish to speak, and I appreciate the indulgence of my colleagues in the few minutes that you've given me. Thank you.
Much the senator from Alaska. We now have about how much time left?
5 minutes.
5 minutes to be equally divided between Senator Mikulski, Senator Shaheen. Thank you.
Madam President,
The senator from Maryland.
I really strongly urge that the Violence Against Women Act come up for the floor so that we could look at the issues and debate them in an open and public forum. And if people have amendments to either add or subtract from the bill or improve the bill, let's do it, because this is really a compelling situation. I've been here since we've passed that first bill in 1994. The original architect was Senator Joe Biden, now our Vice President. Why did we do it? It's a compelling need. 1 in 4 women will be a victim of domestic violence. 16 million children are opposed to domestic violence each year. 23 million will be victims of physical or sexual violence, 20,000 in my own state of Maryland. Since we created the legislation in 1994, the hotline, the national hotline, has received over 1 million calls when women felt that they were in danger. So that 1 million, those 1 million people had a chance of being rescued. And who is the biggest request for passing the Violence Against Women? It is not only the women of America, it is also local police. 1 out of 4 police officers killed in the line of duty are responding to domestic violence. They love the lethality index. When they go to a home, they have a checklist to determine how dangerous is that situation. Is it simply a spat or a dispute, or are they in the danger zone? Madam President, we debate big issues. War and peace, the deficit, all these are important. But we've got to remember our communities and our families. And I think if you're beaten and abused, you should be able to turn to your government to either be rescued and put you on the path, and also to have those very important programs early on to do prevention and intervention. I fund this bill. I stand ready to support the passage of the bill and putting the money in the checkbook to support it. I ask unanimous consent my full statement be in the record. Maryland's done such a good job, and I'm going to leave time for other senators. I'm going to yield the floor, but I will not yield on this issue.
Without objection.
Madam President.
The senator from New Hampshire.
I'm pleased to join my colleagues on the floor today to support this crucial legislation to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. It provides essential services to women and families across the United States, and I have seen it in my home state of New Hampshire, where one program that I want to talk about funds services training officers and prosecution. It's called STOP, and it provides law enforcement the tools they need to combat domestic violence. This was a life-saving service for a woman from New Hampshire named Kathy, who was in an abusive relationship for 6 years. Kathy was being abused as often as twice a week, frequently leaving her with black eyes and bruises, and once her partner Mark threw her down the stairs. Things worsened after the couple had their house foreclosed on, and one day Mark grabbed Kathy by the throat, lifted her up off the floor, and dropped her and began punching her again and again in front of their 3-year-old child. This was the last straw. Kathy finally mustered the courage to contact a friend who helped her call the local police. Kathy obtained a temporary domestic violence restraining order, and Mark was charged with assault. But as is often the case, criminal and civil procedures overwhelmed and frustrated Kathy, so at times she even considered dropping the whole thing. But fortunately, funding from the Violence Against Women Act made it possible for Kathy to have an attorney who could help her, and thanks to this assistance from STOP, from the Violence Against Women Act, Kathy was able to obtain sole custody of her children, as well as support payments, and she was ultimately able to make a fresh start free from abuse. This body should not be divided on this issue. I'm so pleased to have Senator Murkowski join us on the floor today to point out that this is a bipartisan issue.
Time has expired.
And I would like to submit my entire statement for the record and urge my colleagues to support this reauthorization.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President.
The senator from California.
It's hard to believe we're having a debate in 2012 about protecting women from violence, but we are. I ask unanimous consent to place my full statement in the record, and I yield the floor.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam
Senator
President.
from Arizona.
Thank you. Let me return to the pending business before the Senate, the Jobs Act. At a moment when millions of Americans are looking for work, we have an opportunity to do something in a bipartisan way that will actually help job creators and entrepreneurs. Despite all the hype about economic improvements, we're still experiencing the slowest and weakest recovery since the Great Depression. More than 45 million Americans are on food stamps. Unemployment has been higher than 8% for 3 years. There are 700,000 fewer jobs today than when President Obama took office. 700,000 fewer jobs today. And on top of that, of course, gas prices are skyrocketing. As I noted on Monday, the President is painting, I believe, a too rosy picture of the economy when he's out campaigning. He stated that there have been 24 consecutive months of private sector job growth. But I'd like to note how the numbers tell a different story. Economists generally agree that for employment to just hold even, about 150,000 jobs need to be created each month in order to employ the new people, the new entrants into the job market or the workforce. And these include people like those who have recently graduated, those who have concluded military service or other family obligations, about 150,000 each month. So that number of jobs has to be created just to stay even. So the logical question to ask is, how many of the last 24 months saw job growth above 150,000? And the answer is only 10 of those 24 months. In other words, job creation has been high enough to keep pace with the new force entrants only 10 months out of the last 2 years. In fact, private sector job creation was actually lower this last February than it was in January. This is according to a chart on the President's own campaign website. So, we clearly need better public policy here to put people back to work, legislation that will actually spur job creation. Practically every bill that's come to the floor in the last 3 years has been labeled a jobs bill, but to Orwellian effect. Even bills like Obamacare and Dodd-Frank, which imposed massive new costs on businesses, were called jobs bills by their supporters. But finally, with the Jobs Act now pending, we have a rare occasion to pass a bill that Republicans and Democrats agree will help create jobs. The House overwhelmingly passed the bill 390 to 23, majorities in both parties, and the President has issued a statement of administration policy endorsing the legislation. So this is something we should move forward with. The Jobs Act will demonstrate to entrepreneurs and job creators that we value what they do, that we want to make it easier for them to innovate, to gain access to capital, to grow, and to lift others up as they become more successful. America has many dynamic companies and fast-growing businesses with the potential to create many more. The people behind successful companies are driven by the satisfaction that comes from creating and innovating and solving problems. And in many cases, they're making products or providing services that improve our quality of life. This is a good thing. It deserves our support. Good public policy hurdles to opportunity, on the other hand, need solution. And this bill will help to solve some of this by getting those hurdles out of the way. For example, the Jobs Act will help to cut some of the red tape that burdens startup companies. One of the best overhauls is a reduction in the costly regulatory burdens contained in the infamous Sarbanes-Oxley Section 404B accounting rules. Reducing this burden means growing companies can spend less time on paperwork and more time on raising capital, growing their businesses. These are companies that have the potential to be the next Groupon, Yelp, or LinkedIn, 3 companies that didn't exist a decade ago, and all of which recently had initial public offerings. Here's what the Chamber of Commerce had to say in support of the House-passed bill. Quote, "The Jobs Act would enhance capital formation needed to build new businesses, expand existing businesses, and create jobs. It would put into place several important and in some cases overdue reforms that would incentivize initial public offerings, or IPOs," end of quote. And part of the beauty of this bill, Madam President, is that we don't even know who will benefit from its policy reforms. It applies to everybody. It's the opposite of the crony capitalism that provided government funds to companies like Solyndra and General Motors. Indeed, this is legislation that will demonstrate what the private sector can do when government promotes freedom and opportunity. It will show that we don't need government to try to create jobs or make ham-fisted attempts to play venture capitalist. Because this is such good bipartisan legislation, it's deeply troubling to hear that it's being stalled right here in the Senate. The front page headline of Congressional Quarterly this morning reads, and I quote, "Democrats move to slow jobs bill," end of quote. The article notes that passage appears unlikely this week as Democrats try to add controversial provisions to the bill, which do not have broad bipartisan support. If this bill does not pass, or if the Senate Democrats add poison pills, it will be quite obvious that this is part of a broader political strategy, one that relies on a do-nothing Congress. That's the campaign theme the President's been running on. If Congress actually does something in a bipartisan way that helps many Americans, well, it will undermine his narrative. He's relying on congressional dysfunction to keep that narrative going, and that's why we have to rise above it. Yes, this is a cynical conclusion, but if this bipartisan bill is derailed, it will be hard to draw any other. It was our understanding when we all agreed to go to the bill that it would be considered under regular order. This bill is too important to play procedural games like filing cloture and filling the parliamentary tree and the like. I urge my colleagues not to stall this bill or to jeopardize its passage with partisan provisions. Let's get this bill to the President's desk. Our first priority should be helping Americans get jobs, not strategizing to save the President's job.
Madam President,
Senator from Iowa.
I would ask unanimous consent to speak for 12 minutes in morning business.
Without objection.
This is Sunshine Week, a week that's observed annually to point out that the public's business ought to be public and that government, except in the cases of national security, should be open to public inspection. And this week coincides with the birthday of James Madison, the founding father, known for his emphasis upon checks and balances in government and advocacy of open government. Open government and transparency are essential to maintaining our democratic form of government. Although it's Sunshine Week, I'm sorry to report that contrary to President Obama's proclamations, and he made these proclamations when he took office 3 years ago and made them soon after he took office, in fact within hours after the swearing in, that 3 years later the sun still isn't shining in on the public's business here in Washington, D.C. So there is a real disconnect between the President's words and the actions of his administration. On his first full day in office, President Obama issued a memorandum on the Freedom of Information Act. And this memo went to the heads of executive agencies. In it, the President instructed these executive agencies to, quote, adopt a presumption in favor of disclosure in order to renew their commitments to the principles embodied in the Freedom of Information Act and to usher in a new era of open government, end of quote. We all know that actions speak louder than words. Unfortunately, based on his own administration's actions, It appears that the President's words about open government and transparency are words that can be ignored. If not ignored by the President, and maybe well-intended on the part of the President, being ignored down to the bowels of the bureaucracy. Given my experience in trying to pry information out of the executive branch, and based on investigations I've conducted and inquiries by the media, I'm disappointed to report that President Obama's statements about transparency are not being put into practice. In other words, it's a little bit like business as usual when I had the same problems when we had Republican presidents, but based upon the President's pronouncements after he's swearing in, I expected things to be totally different in this administration, and I don't find them to be any different. Federal agencies under control of the President's political appointees have been more aggressive than ever in withholding information from the public and from the Congress. Throughout my career, I've been actively conducting oversight of the executive branch regardless of who controls the Congress or what party controls the White House. When the agencies I'm reviewing get defensive and when they refuse to respond to my request, it makes me wonder what they're trying to hide. Over the last year, many of my requests for information from various agencies have been turned down again and again, either because I'm ranking member or because I'm not chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Agencies within the executive branch have repeatedly cited Privacy Act as a part of rationale for their decision not to grant requests, even though the Privacy Act explicitly says that it is not meant to limit the flow of information from the executive branch to the Congress. This disregard by the executive branch for the clear language of the law is disheartening, and it's quite appropriate that during Sunshine Week we bring out the truth. Since January 2011, in another example, Chairman Issa and I have been stonewalled by Attorney General Holder and by other people in the Justice Department regarding our investigation of Operation Fast and Furious. This deadly operation led thousands of weapons to walk from the United States into Mexico, despite the fact that the Department of Justice Inspector General possesses over 80,000 relevant documents. Congress has received only around 6,000 in response to a subpoena from the House Oversight Committee. Even basic documents about the case have been withheld by the Justice Department. Yet the Department insists on telling us, and before they tell us, they seem to tell the press, that we are cooperating with Senator Grassley and Congressman Issa. The sun must shine on Fast and Furious so that the public can understand how such a dangerous operation took place and what can be done to prevent such stupid actions of our government in the future. I've also worked hard to bring transparency to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is an executive branch agency that desperately needs more sunshine. Over the past 2 years, I've been investigating rampant fraud, waste, and abuse at public housing authorities throughout the country. I've discovered exorbitant salaries paid to executive staff, conflicts of interest, poor living conditions, and outright fraud, waste, and abuse of taxpayers' dollars. Many of these abuses have been swept under the rug, and housing and urban development have been slow at correcting the problems. HUD cannot keep writing checks to these local housing authorities and then blindly hope that the money gets to those that Congress intended to help. I'll continue to work to bring sunshine to housing and urban development as well. In April of last year, I requested documents from the Federal Communication Commission regarding valuable regulatory waiver that it granted to a company called Light Squared. Light Squared was attempting to build a satellite phone network in a band of spectrum adjacent to global positioning station. The problem is that Light Squared's network causes interference with critical GPS users such as the Department of Defense, the Federal Aviation Administration, and NASA. Now, the FCC responded to my document request by saying that they don't give documents to anyone but the two chairs of the committee with direct jurisdiction over the Federal Communication Commission. Now, how idiotic, because that means that if you're not chairman of a committee, in other words, if you're in the 99 6/10% of the Congress that does not chair a committee with direct jurisdiction, then as a member of Congress you're out of luck and you can't fulfill your responsibilities of constitutional oversight, and you can't be a check as envisioned by Madison writing the Constitution on the executive branch of government. So in this letter to me from Chairman Janikowski, he told me that he would make his staff available even if I didn't get the documents, so I could interview the staff. But when I took him up on his offer and asked to interview members of his staff, my request was refused. Once again, actions speak louder words, people can get away with lying, and there's stonewalling, pure and simple. It seems obvious that the FCC is embarrassed and afraid of what might come from uncovering the facts behind what the Washington Post called the Light Squared debacle. If there's nothing to hide, then why all of the stonewalling? The FCC seems determined to stonewall any attempt at transparency. But it's not just the executive branch that needs more transparency. The judiciary should be transparent and accessible as well. That's why over a decade ago, I introduced the Sunshine in the Courtroom Act, a bipartisan bill which will allow judges at all federal courts to open their courtrooms to television cameras and radio broadcasts. By letting the sunshine in on federal courtrooms, Americans will have an opportunity to better understand the judicial process. The sunshine effort has no better friend than whistleblowers, private citizens and government employees who come forward with allegations of wrongdoing and cover-ups, risk their livelihoods to expose misconduct. The value of whistleblowers is the reason that I continue to challenge the bureaucracy and Congress to support whistleblowers. For over 2 decades, I've learned from, appreciated, and honored whistleblowers. Congress needs to make a special note of the role that whistleblowers play in helping us fulfill our constitutional duty of conducting oversight in the executive branch. The information provided by whistleblowers is vital to effectual congressional oversight. Documents alone are insufficient when it comes to understanding a dysfunctional bureaucracy. Only whistleblowers can explain why something is wrong and provide the best evidence to prove it. Moreover, only whistleblowers can help us truly understand the problems with the culture at government agencies. Whistleblowers have been instrumental in uncovering $700 being spent on toilet seats at the Department of Defense. These American heroes were also critical in our learning about how the FDA missed the boat and approved Vioxx, how government contracts were inappropriately steered at the General Services Administration, and how Enron was cooking the books and ripping off investors. Like all whistleblowers, each whistleblower in these cases demonstrated tremendous courage. They stuck their neck out for the good of us all. They spoke the truth. They didn't take the easy way out by going along to get along or looking the other way when they saw wrongdoing. I've said it for many years without avail, of course, but I'd like to see a president or this president of the United States have a Rose Garden ceremony honoring whistleblowers. This would send a message from the very top of the bureaucracy to the lowest levels that the importance and value of whistleblowers. We all ought to be grateful for what they do and appreciate the very difficult circumstances they often have to endure to do so, sacrificing family finances, their employability, and the attempts by powerful interests to smear their good names and intentions. I've used my experience working with whistleblowers to promote legislation to protect them from retaliation, legislation as the Whistleblower Protection Act, Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and False Claims Act, recognize the benefits of whistleblowers and offer protection to those seeking to uncover the truth. For example, whistleblowers have used the False Claims Act to help the federal government recover more than $30 billion since Congress passed my key TAM amendments in 1986. These laws are a good step. However, more can be done. For example, the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act will provide much-needed updates to federal whistleblower protections. I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor and believe the Senate should move this important legislation immediately. This bill includes updates to the Whistleblower Protection Act to address negative interpretations of the Whistleblower Protection Act from both the Merit System Protection Board and the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. I started out my remarks by quoting James Madison, the founding father, who was one of the inspirations for Sunshine Week. Madison understood the dangers posed by the type of conduct that we're seeing from President Obama's political appointees. Madison explained that, quote, a popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce and a tragedy, or perhaps both. I'll continue doing what I can to hold this administration's feet to the fire, to protect whistleblowers, to get the truth out, and to save the taxpayers' money. I hope that my colleagues will help work with me so that we can move towards restoring real sunshine in both words and actions here in Washington, D.C. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from Alaska.
Thank you, Madam President. A lot of discussion about energy going on. The President spoke about it this morning. It's nice to hear us all saying the same thing, that this country should have an all-of-the-above energy policy. It's a phrase that I have used for years now, and I suppose that that it's the highest form of flattery to have that scooped up by others and carried. But I think it is important for us to remember that policies have to translate from mere words into actions. And with the President's comments today, unfortunately, I'm not convinced that he is intending to help turn our all-of-the-above policy into reality. I think if he was really serious about doing that, he would acknowledge that there is far more that our country can do to increase our supply when it comes to oil and oil production. I think he would admit that with oil prices that are above $100 a barrel, gasoline edging up every day, close to $4 a gallon. Madam President, this is not a political opportunity for anyone. This is a legislative imperative for all of us. So the question that needs to be asked is, what can we do? I would agree with the President that there is no one silver bullet, there is no one quick fix. We can't snap our fingers and have the price at the pump go down. But I think it is important to talk honestly about what's going on with supply and with production here in this country. Much discussion over these past several months about the Keystone project out of Canada and that pipeline. It continues to amaze me. It makes me crazy to think that we have an opportunity to have our closest neighbor and our best trading partner to supply us with oil instead of receiving oil from OPEC. Keystone could come online very quickly, bring oil to our refineries, and to our gas tanks. If the administration supports construction of a pipeline from Oklahoma to Texas, as they have suggested, I don't see why we can't allow construction of a pipeline from Alberta and North Dakota and then all the way down. I'm confident that there are enough construction workers that are ready and waiting to start on both ends. When you say, well, it needs more consideration, more review, I would remind people that this has been a project that has been at least 4 years of environmental review. So, you know, this is one of those choices, I think, that's pretty clear, pretty stark. Most Americans, I believe, would much rather get their oil from Canada than from OPEC. And yet, some of what we are seeing come out of this Congress from members of the Senate here, the suggestion is instead of going to Canada, we should go tin cup in hand to Saudi Arabia and ask them for increased production. I cannot imagine why it would be more preferable to producing more American oil or allowing more oil from Canada. This is a pretty clear choice for me. But again, it's an argument that we continue to have, and we don't seem to be making the necessary headway on it. Earlier this week, the President said that the best thing that we can do about gas prices is to reduce our dependence on foreign oil, which will reduce the price of gasoline over time. 1 year ago, he said producing more oil in America can help lower our oil prices. But again, that's talk that's going on right now, and talk that's not necessarily matching reality. Yesterday, I was involved in 2 hearings of the appropriations subcommittees. In one, we had Department of Interior official who confirmed that the oil production on federal lands is down and not up. And there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion about how we in this country are seeing more oil and gas production than ever before. But the fact of the matter is, Madam President, we are seeing an increase in oil. We are seeing an increase in natural gas. But we're not seeing it on our federal lands. We're seeing these increases on state lands and on private lands. When it comes to onshore oil, we've actually gone down by 14% from last year. When it comes to offshore oil, we have gone down from 17% last year. So to suggest somehow that we're doing astonishing when, in fact, the area where the federal government does have some ability to incent some production here, we're seeing production decrease. We also heard confirmation in the hearing yesterday that producers are leaving the federal lands, which are, again, these are the only lands that the administration has control over, not because the resources are necessarily greater somewhere else, but because of federal taxes, of the federal royalties, the bureaucracy, the permitting process that make state and private lands more attractive. It was quite clear in the testimony that it does indeed cost more to produce on federal lands, and they do worry about that migration to go to state lands and private lands. This is a chart here that I have about the number of applications for permits to drill on federal lands. And if you look at the timeline here, we're going up and up and up. This is 2001. This is during the Bush administration when it increased 92%, and we hit 2008. The number of permits to drill that have been approved during this administration is down 36%. And again, this is in the area where the federal government has control. So please, I think we need to get beyond the idea that we are allowing drilling everywhere. America's largest untapped oil fields, onshore and offshore, quite honestly, are still off limits. In Alaska, we've got more than 40 billion barrels of oil that are trapped beneath federal lands, and the administration is making clear that they intend to keep much of that off limits to development. Again, we've got money buried in the ground, literally, in Alaska, ready, waiting, and willing to advance not only the resource for American consumption, bringing the jobs, but also bringing important revenues to our Treasury. I think it is quite apparent that supply matters. Again, I mentioned the request from one of our colleagues here that we go to Saudi Arabia for 2.5 million barrels per day. I don't think that that is an appropriate policy that we should embark on. Since at least the mid-90s, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have claimed that since oil exploration takes a long time to bring online, that we just shouldn't do it. It was the senior senator from Massachusetts who said back in 2002, he said, I quote, if you open the refuge today, you're not going to see oil until about 2012, maybe a couple years earlier. Well, here we are at 2012. If we had started then, we wouldn't perhaps be having this discussion now. This argument has gone on for so long that even Jay Leno is making jokes about it on TV. It is amazing to me that we continue to say it's going to take too long to bring on, so we shouldn't start today. I have two separate bills, Madam President, that allow access to the non-wilderness section of ANWR, this is the 1002 area, to be carefully opened for development. That field would bring on roughly 1 million barrels of oil to market each day. Right now, had this not been blocked back in 1995. That would have been good for American workers, good for the price of oil, good for the Federal Treasury, and I believe it could have been conducted and completed without impact to the environment. When we talk about our abilities here, I think it is fair to say we do have a lot of oil here in this country, and we can bring more of it to market. If we were to increase our domestic production by the 2.5 million barrels a day that has been suggested that we get from Saudi Arabia, if we were to access Alaskan oil along with the Keystone oil, that would double world spare capacity and insulate us almost entirely from OPEC. So when we talk about a way that we can move ourselves as a nation away from the stranglehold that OPEC holds over us, I think it's important to consider what our options are. Madam President, I know we'll have more to add on this later. I know some of my colleagues are coming to the floor later to speak on this, but at this time I will yield the floor to my colleague from Louisiana, the energy breadbasket down there in the Gulf, and thank you for your attention.
Senator from Louisiana.
Madam President, I'm happy and honored to join my colleague from Alaska, also both of our colleagues, Senator Barrasso, to talk about this vital issue, U.S. energy, doing something about the price at the pump, including by accessing more of the vital U.S. energy we have right here on our shores. As the senator from Alaska has said, Madam President, at least I give the President kudos for using the right language, saying the right things, even if his policies have not caught up with that yet. He's talking about an all-of-the-above energy strategy, something we have been advocating for years. He's also talking about a release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I disagree with that policy, but at least it acknowledges that supply matters. And if we increase supply, we would lower price. Now, I think the important way we need to do that, of course, is to produce more energy right here at home. Madam President, a lot of Americans don't realize, but we are the single most energy-rich country in the world, bar none. No one else comes close. So when you look at all of our energy resources compared to all of the energy resources of other countries, we are the richest country in terms of energy resources. Now, why don't most Americans think of ourselves that way? It's because we're the only country in the world that takes well over 90% of those resources and puts them off limits. Through federal law, particularly under this Obama administration, America says no, 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 no. The Obama administration says no. No, you can't drill off the East Coast. No, you can't drill off the West Coast. No, you can't touch the Eastern Gulf, at least for now. No, you can do little to nothing offshore Alaska. No, you can't touch the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge. No, we're going to do less instead of more on federal land. And no, we're going to re-examine hydraulic fracturing, which is a key process to the development of our rich shale resources, even though there's no scientific basis for that attack on hydraulic fracturing. This administration has said no, 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 no in terms of policy. The President's saying all of the above. The President's admitting supply matters, but the policy hasn't caught up, and it has to catch up. What am I thinking of? Well, the Outer Continental Shelf. We are rich in resources in oil and gas in the Outer Continental Shelf, and yet President Obama's 5-year plan, which he's required to submit under law, his 5-year plan for developing that Outer Continental Shelf is only half as much as the previous 5-year plan. So we're backing up. We're headed in the wrong direction, not the right direction of accessing more of our own energy. Permitting in the Gulf of Mexico, where I live. Since the BP disaster, permitting first stopped and now has started again, but only at a trickle, and we're still 30 to 40% below the pace of permitting compared to before the incident. We need to get back to that pace of permitting and then surpass it. Federal lands, the area that the federal government controls most directly. Production activity on federal lands is down from a few years ago. It's not up, it's down 14, 17% offshore and onshore than a few years ago. Of course, the Keystone Pipeline was mentioned. That's not quite U.S. energy, but it's as close as you can get to that. It's dependable Canadian energy from a very firm, strong ally. President Obama is saying no to that. So I'm happy to hear that his rhetoric has changed in an election year. But when are those policies going to change on the Outer Continental Shelf, on permitting in the Gulf and elsewhere, on federal land, on the Keystone Pipeline? That's what needs to change. We need to say yes to solid, dependable American energy. It will increase our energy independence. It will increase supply and stabilize price at the pump. It will build great American jobs, jobs which, by the way, cannot be outsourced to China and India if they're domestic energy jobs. It'll even bring more revenue into the federal government, lowering deficit and debt. Let's say yes. Let's say yes, yes, yes to that. I know my colleague, Senator Barrasso, is vitally interested in these issues as well, and I'd turn to him through the chair.
Madam President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Well, Madam President, I agree with my colleague from Louisiana, who is an expert in these areas and spends so much time talking about energy and the needs for affordable energy. I mean, that's what people are asking for. They're noticing the pain at the pump, and they're saying, why is this? And they don't have to look any further than the President's policies. The President's efforts to, in my opinion, make it harder for us to explore for energy. And what does he try to do? And just the Reuters report this morning, U.S. Britain to agree emergency oil stocks release, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This is there for emergencies, disruption of supply, not for a political disaster. And what the President has on his hands now is a political disaster, with the fact that the price at the pump has gone up about a penny a day for the last 30 days. So people are paying more. They realize that if they're trying to also deal with bills and a mortgage and kids, it's much, much harder. It's a direct impact on their quality of life. And yet the President continues, as he has done today, to give speeches about the gasoline prices and to blame everyone other than himself. But it is discouraging to see the President looking to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. He tapped it last year, 30 million barrels, and the time drew down our Strategic Petroleum Reserve and still has not refilled it. So any effort to draw down from it today will take it down even further, again putting us more at risk for a true supply disruption. And those are the things that we're facing today as a nation, a President with a poorly planned energy approach and having to rely on something that was placed there for true emergencies. But the President continues to make his claims as he did today and he did last week. And, one of his claims is that America only has 2% of the world's oil reserves. The truth is that proven and undiscovered oil resources total 7 times that amount. The President doesn't seem to want to face that fact. The President claims an all-of-the-above energy strategy, but the truth is the President's policies truly seem to be hostile to low-cost domestic fuels, especially gasoline and other products from oil. We see this when the Secretary of Interior, when he was a member of the Senate, said he would oppose offshore exploration even at $10 a gallon for gasoline. The President says using less gasoline will lower prices. Well, isn't that a supply and a demand issue? Well, the President ignores supply. We need to increase supply. One of the ways to do that is by exploring more offshore, on federal land, and in Alaska, and bringing supply from Canada to the United States with the Keystone XL pipeline, instead of saying to Canada, no, sell that to China. Continuing to look at the incredible needs of this nation for fuel, our ability to increase supply, and the President's efforts to do just about everything else. So people at home are concerned. I visit with people every weekend in Wyoming. I did last weekend. I will again this weekend. And I hear what my colleague from Louisiana is hearing, what my colleague from Alaska is hearing, is that there are lots of opportunities to increase the supply, opportunities that are available and should be used here in this country. We are so dependent on overseas supply, so dependent on OPEC, so dependent on long shipping routes coming through the Straits of Hormuz. Our solution, take care of the problem at home. Work on energy security for our nation. The Democrats' proposal, and we heard it from Senator Schumer from New York, who said, well, just ask Saudi Arabia to produce more, 2 million barrels more a day. Rely on a country far away, an organization of petroleum countries whose interests are not necessarily our own. That is not the solution that the American people want. The American people want energy security, which begins at home, and North American energy security includes the availability of oil from Canada, the availability of oil offshore, on federal land in this country, as well as in Alaska. And it is time for the President to adopt those proposals and those approaches rather than talking about his approach, which leads people who listen and listen carefully to realize that he is intentionally distorting the facts and misleading the American people in speech after speech. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
And we're in morning business, is that correct? Okay.
Senator is correct.
First of all, I want to thank my colleagues for coming to the floor today and talking about the issue of energy and energy independence and the rising cost of energy. It's critically important. I wanted to come for a few moments and talk about something else, if I could, for just a few minutes. I think of critical importance, of eternal importance, and that's the issue of human rights. I think as Americans we have to always remind ourselves that our nation was actually founded on the principles of human rights. If you read back to some of the earliest founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, for example, it says very clearly at the outset that one of the founding principles that led to this creation of this nation, our republic, and the Constitution that followed that, was the notion that all of us are created equal, that every human being on the planet that has ever been born, that will ever be born anywhere in the world, is born with certain rights, that the source of those rights is our Creator. You think about that for a moment, because that is not a common belief. In fact, for almost all of human history, people have believed that our rights as people come not from our Creator, They come from the government. They come from our leaders. Our rights are what the government allows us to have. But that's not what founded our country. Our country was founded on this very powerful idea, the idea that the source of our rights and our value as a human being come from our Creator. And, of course, that manifested itself in all sorts of things in this country. A constitution, for example, that in recognition of those rights created a system of government that said that the job of the government was to protect these rights, not to grant them. And, of course, the American miracle has plenty of witnesses, myself included, and is well documented in the annals of history, particularly in the last half century, the American century, the 20th century, which is shown as an example to the world. And yet the issue of human rights continues to be a central one around the world. And one of the places where I think an American example can make the biggest difference. One of the issues that has interested me since I got here to the United States Senate, my background before I got here just a year ago was in state government, and before that in local government. And one of the great things about being in the Senate is you have access to information, sources of information and individuals with information that I didn't have before I came here. And one of the issues that has fascinated me on a global scale is how human rights are still summarily violated all over the planet, and how, in fact, these powerful ideas that are at the core of our founding as a country are still not widely accepted in many parts of the world. And so as we look at the 21st century, and by the way, this is a great time of year to be in Washington. People are on spring break. They're bringing their kids up here to learn about our republic. So I think it's a great time to remind ourselves of one of the things that made us different from the rest of the world is that we are one of the few countries on the planet that really believes that every single person that has ever been born has rights that they are born with. And we take that for granted. If you've been born here and you've lived here your whole life, you think that's the way it is everywhere. It's not. There are so many countries and societies around the world where people are told, you don't have any rights unless we give you rights. Unless your government or your leaders or your laws give you certain rights, you don't have these rights. In America, we almost take that for granted because we believe that we are born with these rights. And the American example to the world has been what can happen when you actually believe that every single human being has worth and value and rights that they are born with and that you have no right to deny from them. Sadly, there is no shortage of examples around the world where those fundamental rights are violated. And I think no nation on this planet has a larger obligation to speak out against it than ours. And so what I intend to do over the next few weeks is come to the floor and highlight some of these egregious human rights violations, because I think they go to the core of our exceptionalism. They go to the heart of who we are as a people and a nation. They go to the center of what makes us different from other countries around the world. And in many respects is at the heart of what is in debate at this very moment in the world. Because as we enter this new 21st century, there are a handful of nations across the globe that do not want the issue of human rights to be central. They don't want this issue to be at the front burner because they don't believe in these things. What they seek is a new international order where the violation of human rights is nobody's business. You see that today in Syria, where you have people being murdered, where unarmed civilians are being pursued and shelled by an army, where you're having horrifying examples of human rights violations on a daily basis. And at least two countries, Russia and China, have taken the position that it's nobody's business. And one of those countries is the topic that I want to talk about today, and that's China, an emerging power on the world stage that some people, I think, falsely claim will replace America on the world stage. I think that's an exaggeration. By the way, we welcome the economic progress that China has made. I think it's great news that there are millions of people in China that a decade ago were riding around on a bike and now have a car. Millions of people that only a decade ago were living in deep poverty and today are part of the middle class. I think that's fantastic. But don't get ahead of yourself in believing that China is going to replace America on the world stage. This is still the richest, most powerful country in the world. This is still the most important economy on the planet, and our people are as smart and as creative as they have ever been, and that's not going to change. But I think we have to look at China because if, in fact, they are this rising power, if, in fact, they are going to be a growing influence on the international stage, we have to ask ourselves, what is their commitment to human rights? And sadly, it's not a very good one. And if you look at the issue of Tibet, it's a perfect example. This is a peace-loving people that have sought a certain level of autonomy. They want to preserve their culture. They want to preserve their way of life. They've gone as far as to say we're okay with being under Chinese rule, but we want to protect some of the things that are innate and indigenous to our own culture and our own values. And China is systematically trying to erase their culture and their heritage through processes of re-education, through the jailing of people, through the oppression of people, through the destruction of a free press and of systems of communication. It manifests itself today. You've got, I don't know how many people, I think yesterday was the latest incident, of people in Tibet setting themselves on fire. And by the way, we shouldn't encourage that. Horrifying to see that. We hope that stops. But it just leads to an understanding of the level of desperation that exists in Tibet. Now let me ask you a question. If China is indeed a growing influence on this planet, are these the values that are going to replace American values on the world stage? Are these the values that are going to replace our belief that all individuals are created equal with certain rights that come from their Creator? Are we prepared to retreat from the world stage and allow that to happen without at least speaking out against it? So we should not be surprised that China stands by and says, do nothing, don't even sanction, don't even put out a nasty letter about Syria. We should not be surprised, because a nation that doesn't care about the human rights of their own people is never going to care about the human rights of others. And the question that we have as Americans is, are we prepared to retreat from the world stage and in fact allow nations like that to play a growing role in the world? Are we prepared to silence our own voice at the expense of their voice? I hope not. And so when we debate in this chamber about issues of economic policy, we're debating issues about America's influence in the world. And I would say to you that if America is diminished on the world stage, whether it be by choice or by accident, if we fail to confront the issues that this nation faces and we choose to decline, it won't just be Americans that pay the price. It'll be people all over the world, including the people that live in Tibet. Because then there will be no voice on this planet that condemns human rights violations the way we do. Because there will be no nation in the world that can prove that, in fact, you can have a functional society where the innate worth and the value and the rights of that our Creator gives every human being are respected. That's what's at stake here when we debate America's influence and America's standing in the world. And over the next few weeks, I hope to come to this floor and continue to highlight these egregious, unfortunate, there's no violations of human rights. Tragically, there is no shortage of them. In the weeks to come, we'll talk about the problems of human trafficking that exist in our own country, in our own hemisphere, and all around the world. We'll talk about the violations of religious liberties that exist in societies all over the planet. We'll talk about how women have no rights in many of these countries whatsoever. Some nations where a woman is counted as 1/4 of a man in terms of their worth and their ability to speak out. We'll talk about other countries where people are systematically jailed like they are in our own hemisphere for putting out pamphlets that criticize the government. We'll talk, of course, about what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Tibet. Human rights is at the core of who we are as a nation. It is at the core of our identity as a people and as a power on the global stage. It is an issue that doesn't belong to the right or to the left, to Republicans or to Democrats. It is an issue that should unite us all in this chamber and in this country, and we hope to be an effective voice in that regard in the years that God permits me to serve here in the Senate. Madam Chair, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from West Virginia.
I thank the good senator from Missouri for her courtesy. Madam President, I rise today to express a very, very strong support for the confirmation of Gina Groh to serve as a United States District Judge for the Northern District of West Virginia. Gina Groh is absolutely qualified for this position and deserving of every senator's support. She has more than 22 years of legal experience, of which 14 have been devoted to serving the people of West Virginia, first as a prosecutor and now as a trial judge. In these roles, Judge Groh has exhibited a superior intellect and an unwavering commitment to fairness and to justice. Lawyers describe her as meticulously prepared as a judge, and they describe her as somebody who administers justice in a timely and equitable manner. Because of her superior qualifications, she was reported out of the Judiciary Committee by an unopposed voice vote and has been waiting patiently for 5 months for an up or down vote. Judge Groh will be ready for the job on the day that she assumes the job, providing, of course, that she passes through this body. She knows how to make tough decisions. She knows how to issue thoughtful opinions and to protect the rights and liberties that are guaranteed to all Americans under our laws and our Constitution. I'm very proud to urge all senators to support Judge Groh's nomination. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from California.
Madam President, I rise today to support